This is the Commercial Landscapers podcast hosted by Dave Anderson and Robert Klinkenbeard. This show will absolutely transform your leadership by developing all aspects of your life in business, family, personal and health. Only by fine-tuning yourself will you truly operate as a highly functioning leader. So Dave, this is Robert Klinkenbeard from the Commercial Landscapers podcast. Welcome to the show today. I'm really excited, especially hearing a similar accent. I'm actually wondering if people are going to understand it. Maybe I should get it transcribed into proper English. So thank you for joining me today.
Not a problem, Robert. Great to be here with you, and nothing like a Northern Irishman and a Scotsman getting together to talk. Like you said, we'll need subtitles or something.
Oh, I know. What's funny is I get asked the question all the time, whether we actually get on, along, and I keep telling people that, all of us just, dislike the English.
Yeah.
So apart from that, we're all brothers. We drink whiskey together. Some of us wear kilts.
Yes, the Northern Irish and the Scots and the Welsh seldom have had a problem getting together, unless it's an important rugby game, in which case, everything goes out the window.
Good point. So, Dave, tell me a little bit about yourself, your background.
Sure. Happy to. So I was brought up in Belfast in Northern Ireland and started my career actually back in the UK working for Accenture, big IT consulting company, which I'm sure your listeners are familiar with, working in their healthcare division. And during that time in Accenture, really discovered that it was those leaders who weren't necessarily the best functionally at their job that made the best leaders. In some cases it was, but in most cases, those leaders that had the biggest impact on me and my team and the clients that we worked with had a whole different way about looking at leadership. There was a different mindset, perspective, set of skills and behaviors, and that twigged something inside me, a desire to further or better understand what great leadership looked like, and then ultimately to help other people get there. And so I moved over to the States nearly 10 years ago or so, first of all to Massachusetts and then to Southern California, where I live and reside now. And through a couple of iterations, essentially started working with senior executive teams of usually fast-growing organizations, to help them work better, more effectively as a team together, and then also to help build leadership competencies in their organization. And so now I teach and train and coach on becoming a better leader, somebody that can elevate their focus, develop their people, and get more done.
Awesome. That's good. I mean, I like that background. And you just came out earlier this year, in January, 2020, with a new book. Is that right?
Yep, came out January 26th, called The Selfevolved Leader, which was the ultimate worst time to release a book or indeed to try anything new, given what 2020 has brought for all of us. But thoroughly enjoyed the last couple of months and just trying to push the book out there and get it into some hands of some leaders that could truly benefit from it.
So what do you mean by self-evolved leadership? Explain what that means. Sure.
So the book is taken from my experience in working with leaders and leadership teams. So you're not going to see a big academic study. I don't talk about Southwest Airlines or Steve Jobs at Apple. It's not secondary research. It's based off of all of the work that I've done. And one of the things that I have realized over the last number of years is that leadership in and of itself is a true calling. And a lot of, if not most people, end up in leadership positions, not because that's what they aspire to do or be, but because that's what they've been told is the right thing to do. You get promoted, you rise through the ranks, you get into higher and higher levels of authority and responsibility. What's happened as a result of that is then in many organizations, our leaders have put the onus of development and training in the organization. So if I'm going to do a good job and you're going to promote me, then you're going to give me the tools that I need to become a better leader. The unfortunate thing is most organizations are not very good at that. We're just not good at developing our people. Studies over and over and over show that there's a massive leadership gap in most of our organizations. And so for me, where I see leaders really adopting principles and practices of excellent leadership are ones who have taken that mantle themselves and said, you know what, I'm the only person responsible for my own growth and development, so it's up to me to do that. And so I base the concept of the self-evolved leader around this notion that no matter what level you're at, whether you're a frontline manager or supervisor, or whether you're the CEO, it's your role, it's your responsibility to develop yourself, to evolve yourself, to stop waiting for that to happen from your organization. So for me, that's the fundamental aspect of a self-evolved leader. And there's a whole bunch of other characteristics that we can talk about.
Yeah. And, it's interesting you say that because, most organizations I go in to help coach, that's one of the big things that I see is that they don't have a training program. That's one of the first things always seems to be on their strategic plan. Hey, we need to do training. And I think, I don't know if it's just because of they hear the word training and just see how much work is involved, that it just typically falls flat. Mm-hmm. But I see it over and over. And, going back to the point you were making, people get promoted, as I see it, whether it be landscape companies or other companies throughout the US, based on being really good at what their trade is, whether mm-hmm. they're account manager or salesperson, but typically when they get up into that leading a team, then they really struggle. Mm-hmm. Just because, as you say, they don't have that skills. They've just been left on this island, and then, then the owners wonder why they're failing.
Right. And it's funny because that example comes up again and again and again. Your best salesperson is probably your worst sales leader. Those are two distinct, completely different things. And yet for, efficacy or time saving or money saving, it's just such it's so allure for so many business owners to say, maybe this can be different. Maybe we can make this work. But it is just a completely different role. And like you said, when that happens, when we get put into that position, in many cases, we're left with no development opportunities, no real understanding of what's expected of us. And that's a recipe for failure. And back to your point about training, it's one of those things that almost every organization says that we should do. But it's also one of the first things that gets cut whenever time is difficult or things are hard, because we believe that it's too hard for us to tie the return of investment on training and developing our people to the bottom line. And the reality is that when times are hard, that's the absolute time when you should be developing your people, because you're going to need your people to be the best version of themselves to help you navigate whatever issue or crisis it is that you're going through. And so again, taking all of that and understanding all of that, I wanted to give leaders, individual leaders, a tool, a roadmap, a specific set of things that they can do, that they can say, hey, if you're not going to train me and develop me, that's okay. I'm going to take it all from here, and I know what I'm going to do to get there myself.
Yeah. So talk about that a little bit. What are some of the the key components of becoming a self-evolved leader? Because I come across leaders, owners, companies all the time that are always looking for that secret sauce.
Right. And you know what, at the end of the day, secret sauce actually just comes down to picking a process, a plan, or a way forward and sticking to it consistently. As you know yourself, there really ain't no secret sauce. Nobody's going to pull something out and we're all going to go, oh my goodness, we've just heard heard from the promised land. At the end of the day, no matter what your favorite author or approaches to developing leadership, what it really comes down to is doing it consistently over the long term. However, what I see in terms of our organizations today, the first thing is to understand and recognize the biggest challenge that we're dealing with, which is that our leaders get caught in this trap, this cycle of mediocrity that is brought along by a couple of different components. We touched on some of them previously, but where it really starts is in a world where everything feels urgent, in a world where everything is moving so quickly and we need to get the job done yesterday rather than today. our leaders, because they don't have development and training, believe or understand that the quickest, most appropriate, highest quality way to attend to something is to lead through acts of heroism. So I'll either just jump in and save the day and do it myself if we've got a problem or a challenge, or I'll just tell my team specifically what to do. And the reason we do that makes sense. We've been rewarded and promoted most of our life for knowing the answers and taking action. But what happens when we lead through heroics like that is we begin to build in our team this sense of learned helplessness, which essentially emerges over time. It just gets to the point where they'll stop even using their own thoughts or their own brain to try to tackle the problems and challenges in front of them. Because if you're always going to save the day for me, I may as well just tell you what the problem is. You tell me what to do, and then we'll all go away. So I developed learned helplessness and become disempowered. And then the leader actually over time, because they're the bottleneck, ends up becoming frustrated and burned out. And they start looking at their team thinking, why are you guys all so useless? And the reality is because you didn't entrust or empower anybody. And so the self-evolved leader recognizes that cycle and says, okay, let's try to break out of that. Let's try to find a way to focus on where you actually add value as a leader, which is not in saving the day, but it's in helping your team achieve your shared goals. And in doing so, helping them to develop and grow so that you're not the hero, but in fact, you're building a team of heroes that can go and save the day. And that's scalable leadership. That's how you build a scalable business.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the end goal of where we're trying to get to in terms of the approach towards self-evolved leadership.
And how do you start that process? Because I was definitely guilty myself of, I had my business. I used to be that leader. I used to be that, somewhat of an ego. I used to be, that go-to person, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed being that person. But then, I can't remember the exact moment, but then I had that, pivotal moment where I thought, well, I'm not really helping develop my team. Mm-hmm. I'm enabling them. They're not, mm-hmm. They're not getting any better. So I started to change my approach where if people came into the room, I would turn around my question and, hey, what would you do? What would your solution be?
Right.
So, it took some time to get there, but, I think eventually some of those, leaders definitely started to get better and better and make smarter decisions. So, talk about that part. What have you seen in your experience?
Well, the process that you're describing is a classic case study because there are a couple of things that happen in there. Number one, you realize that the behaviors that you're exhibiting are an issue or a problem. And for some leaders, that is never a problem because the ego they're so driven by it, in which case, decide that that's what you're going to go do, work for an organization that thrives on heroic leadership and just go have at it. But in making that realization, then you switch the perspective. Like any behavioral change or shift that we need to make, it all comes from a perspective shift. And so in the self-evolved leader, I talk about adopting a new leadership mantra, which is my focus is on helping my team achieve our shared goals, and in doing so to become the best version of themselves. And if you make that the mindset shift, that you make that your perspective, there's no room for acts of heroism there because it negates either one of those two clauses. So once you've made the mindset shift, then it starts to break down a little bit further. The next important thing that you've got to do is rebuild a vision with your team for where you're going, so that you as the leader are not the sole owner of that vision. So I encourage leaders to get in a room with their team and say, hey, I'd love to talk about where you think we can be in 3 to 5 years, what that looks like, what's our reason for existing, why do you get excited about what we do every day, and get more of a collective buy-in to that North Star of where you're going. And so essentially you're casting the net as far as you can and say, okay, that's where we're going together. We've laid the groundwork. I've made the mindset shift. Here's where we're going together. And then it starts to get even more and more granular. So I know you do some work with EOS and Gazelles. So then you start to break it down into its component parts. So if that's our vision, what's our annual plan? What's our quarterly implementation rhythm? How are we moving towards those end goals? And funny enough, that is the least sexy part of it, but it's the most important part, because a heroic leader thrives in the chaos that happens between the quarterly meetings, when new data comes in, when a customer gets pissed off and is on the phone. That's where the heroic leader stands up and goes, yes, this is my time to shine. Mm-hmm. And so if you as a leader can say, you know what, let's actually attach our progress and our drumbeat for implementation to those meetings, you get a lot more done. You move the needle a lot faster. So talk about building an implementation rhythm in the book. And then the final aspect is then, what are the skills that I need to do this? And one of which is what you're talking about when you talked about putting the question back to them. Operating with more of a coach-like perspective is one of the key skills of a self-evolved leader. I often say that great leadership just comes down to asking better questions. And one of the best questions that you can ask is, what do you think? Because that just then puts it back on and lets them grow and rise. Yeah. So absolutely. Mindset shift, build a vision with your team, build that implementation rhythm, and then develop the skills to help you stick to that implementation rhythm.
Yeah, no, that's as you see, that's what I practice with a lot of my clients, and it's really good to see. Some people thrive in that environment, and other people just fail miserably just because they can't handle that accountability and that spotlight on them. So, but one of the things I was going to ask you was, when you talk about leadership disciples, what do you mean by that?
I talk about leadership disciplines.
Disciplines, sorry.
Yeah, so I got fed up about 4 years ago of this argument about whether leadership skills are soft skills or not. I mean, I don't think they are. I think that the debate is redundant. So I just said, let's stop calling them skills. Let's call them disciplines, because there ain't no soft disciplines. A discipline by its very nature and fact is a hard thing to get good at. And so I talk about the 5 key disciplines that any leader needs to at least get a little good at. And first of all, they are reclaiming your attention. In a world where we've allowed anybody to interrupt us at any time, in any medium, and assign any priority that they choose to, we're just bombarded by pings everywhere we look. And a good leader cannot be effective if they're just being pulled in a million different directions. So finding a way to reclaim your attention has got to be step number 1. The second discipline then is to get good at facilitating the workflow amongst your team. So getting really good at delegating, so that you're not left with everything on your to-do list, but that you've got a way in spreading that out amongst your team in the most appropriate, effective way. Third discipline then is to support for high performance. So rather than micromanage, have an open door policy that says, hey, you said that the next check-in date was going to be next Thursday. That's awesome. I don't need to see you until then. However, if you've got some issues or challenges, then more than happy for you to come. Let's talk about them. But again, to use the power of those questions, what's the challenge? What have you thought? What have you done? What are you going to do? Fourth discipline is the ability to have symbiotic conversations. So when you do need to have a bit of a corrective conversation with somebody, to do it in a way that honors them, that honors you, and honors the team and the purpose that you're walking towards, that gives them the opportunity to opt in to the path forward rather than feel like they're having something imposed upon them. And then the final discipline is just the ability to build shared peer accountability, so that you don't have to be the one that's holding everybody's feet to the fire, but actually when your team gets into a room, they're super excited to hear the updates from everybody and to share their updates, because that's where they see their band of brothers and sisters and the accountability coming. Yep.
Going back to the corrective action or conversations, how frequent do you think that should be had? I mean, some people I talk to say, oh yeah, I'm fine doing that at the annual reviews. And then, I hear other people have different opinions. How have you seen it being most successful?
The funny thing about corrective discussions is we view it for most leaders, it's one of the most difficult things to do, because our brain essentially processes it in the same way that we process a physical threat. So we have a similar fight or flight response to a difficult conversation as we would if we saw somebody charge at us. And so that means that either leaders go in too hard, and I'm sure you've seen those leaders that just shouting at everybody about anything and they're never happy, or most leaders just avoid and hope that it'll go away. And there's always this sense that the first time something happens and you go, it wasn't quite right. Was it awful? Was it terrible? Do I need to write them up for it? No. Okay, I tell you what, if that happens again, then I'll call them out. So it happens 2 times. And then you think, it's happened twice now. Well, you know what? Twice does not make a trend. All right, I want to be fair to the person. And so then they wait for the 3rd time, the 4th time, the 5th time. The problem, before they deal with it, the problem is if you're coming to somebody and they've exhibited a particular behavior and you haven't called them up on it, they're subconsciously going to be thinking to themselves, well, hold on, I've been doing this for a couple of weeks and there was no problem. Why is there an issue now? Why have you changed? What's happened with you? And so my perspective is always to do it as early as possible, because you can be way more empathetic the first time something happens rather than the 5th time. It gets a lot harder to express empathy. And it's just way easier to nip those smaller behavioral corrective things that need to happen, rather than letting it build up over time and it become a pattern.
Yeah, I agree. I've seen more success done by just small, minute changes along the way, rather than trying to change something, massively towards every quarter or once a year. So I'm definitely a big fan of just doing those small corrective actions on a regular basis. Going back to one thing you said earlier, just in terms of, I like what you said about, not only are you developing more as a leader just by, asking those questions and looking for those solutions from your team, but the fact that you're trying to pull your team along with you, mm-hmm. and try and lift them up as well. Talk to me a little bit more about that.
Well, I think that we've got 2 ways in which we can really lead a team. One is to use all of our energy to try to have them come on this journey with us. Or the second way is to stand alongside them and to push that rock up a hill together. The first way leads to stress and burnout and requires much more of you, and quite frankly, it requires you to work a lot harder. Whereas if you can find a way to build the environment in which people want to give their discretionary effort, and in an environment in which they want to take ownership for what it is that they do and to push above and beyond that, you find that the team can carry itself. I often say to leaders that I'm coaching, you want to get to the point where you could take a 6-month vacation and come back and your team has achieved incredible things. But for fear of, for our ego, or for fear of being seen as not valuable, a lot of leaders are terrified by that concept. They say, well, what would I do? To which I say, it's anything. Then you've got the next step to go to. My word, you've just opened a whole world that you could walk into. And so it's like all of this, it all comes down to the ego, and trying to understand that your value as a leader doesn't come from you being the hero like we've talked about. It's building that team of heroes underneath you.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that, because I actually had a conversation yesterday with a lady who, she's been growing her business. She's probably doing a couple $1 million now. And she just said, you know what, I just went on a vacation for 5 weeks with my family. First time I've ever done that in business. And the business is still there. It's still running. Everything went well. And now she's got this, extra step in her stride. She's excited. Now she's thinking about, wow, this is going good. So what's my next stage? How do I scale my company to the next level? Mm-hmm. So she was super excited.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. The dark side of all of that can be sometimes a leader adopts this perspective that is, I'm either here and I'm in charge, or I'm not here. And so they have this tendency where they discover, oh, I can go away for 5 weeks in the place. They all function better without me. That's awesome. And then when they come back into it, they just have this need to kind of put their mark on things again. And so you've got to find a way to balance that to ensure that your voice as a leader is there in the discussions, but that it's there in the same way that it would be for any other member on your team. You don't have the right to come in and just start shaking stuff up all over the place. You've got to find the right balance between those two things.
Yep, no, I agree. So I'm a company owner. I have your book in my hand. I know I've got a set of leaders, 5 or 6 leaders in the company that have grown through the ranks through what they've done good at, but I also know they're struggling to manage the teams beneath them. Maybe it's just not in their skill set or their DNA, whatever, but how would that owner start that journey? How would they get started? How would they implement it in their organization?
So the great thing about the book is the penultimate chapter is it's the action plan. And I put that, it's a 15-week step-by-step program for implementing this on an individual level and as a team level. And I did that because there's so many business authors, they released the book and then 2 years later they released the workbook or the field book, and that's just an attempt to sell more right. books. And I thought, let's just put it in there. And so the more that you can go through this journey as a team, the better. And the more in your organization, you know what it's like. You're trying to bring any change into an organization, you need to have as many people involved in it as possible. And so you can easily work through the steps in the book, which involve things like redesigning, recrafting our vision, ensuring that we've got that implementation rhythm in place, picking out the specific disciplines that each individual needs to work on. And I've got assessments in there to help you identify which of those 5 key disciplines you need to work on. And then I'm a big believer in shared accountability. So getting with your team and saying, okay, what do we need to work on as a group together? And what do we need to work on individually together? And when are we going to get back together to review our progress? And how are we going to hold ourselves accountable to making those changes that we've agreed that we're going to do?
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Dave. So really interesting subject. I think there's a big need there. If people, listeners, want to get in touch with you, hear more about what your offerings are, how would they get in touch with you?
If you're interested in the book, go to selfevolvedleader.com. You can get a free chapter and you can buy it from there. It's also available on Amazon and all those good places. If you'd like to know more about me and the work that I do, go to outfieldleadership.com. And I'm pretty active on Twitter and LinkedIn are the 2 platforms that I'm most active on. Dave McKeown, both of those places. Would love to connect with you and happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you, Dave. Really appreciate you coming in today. I think it's been really interesting subject. I think there's a huge need out there, especially now with people looking at who their leaders are they doing the right job? So thank you, Dave, for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot for having me, Robert. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you. This was the Commercial Landscaper podcast hosted by Dave Anderson, author of Leader is Not a Title, and Robert Clinkenbeard, author of The Ironman Mindset for Entrepreneurs. You can find more details about the show and the hosts at the radixgroupllc.com or thecommerciallandscaper.com.